Ed and John and John.
Oh, okay. You want to switch
All
over?
you need to do is listen. So I'm going to start with some housekeeping matters that were handed to me a minute ago. Please remember to keep your masks on. Just think of it as Halloween and, everybody's good. Also, you may have noticed on the way in, there's some signs in the back. You are welcome to take one. If you know another person who would like one, take a couple of them. The Board of Light and Power has a budget to promote what they're doing. We don't have such a budget. We don't have a committee that is set up to take funds. However, we are asking people to help underwrite certain of activities. For example, the rental of this room is, would you care to hazard a guess, anybody? Oh, wow. You get the prize. Yeah, it's $200. Sign costs $10. So if you're willing to help out, please see Field. My card is sitting in back, blue mask, white hair. That covers a lot of us. On the web page, where you can send a message, www.ghenergy.org. At the bottom of the main page is a simple way for you to send a message to the Board of Light and Power and to members of the City Council. Please let them know what you think. And on behalf of three Board of Light and Power members who are here, their next meeting is this Thursday. Is that correct?
Where?
No? Week from.
How do you?
Week from Thursday. Okay. Bad message. Anyway, you can listen to their board meeting on Zoom. It's a little bit difficult to figure out, but if you stick with it, check on meetings and agenda on their website and you can figure it out. And so I'm just going to keep going. So good evening to y'all. My name is John Jellema, or if you know me, it's Jan Jellema. And Ed may know this. When I was in Lansing, I just got sick of explaining Jan all the time, so answer to either one.
3 lines.
Let me tell you a word about the group that's sponsoring this discussion tonight. The Grand Haven Energy Organization is a growing group of citizens concerned about having a complete, informed, and transparent discussion about present day and future energy sources the Board of Light and Power will use for Grand Haven. Although the Board of Light and Power, BLP as we'll refer to it, although BLP is a municipal power company owned by the citizens of Grand Haven, so far it has been advancing an energy plan with little citizen input. We believe the following about Board of Light and Power plans for the future of energy in Grand Haven. 1, should be based on the best economic and fiscal choice for the ratepayers, businesses, citizens of this community. The plan should be based on the best available information about energy sources. The plan should be based on environmentally responsible decision-making. And the Board of Light and Power plan should be based on significant citizen input. If you want more information about this group, again, go to the website that I mentioned, or you can go to info@ghenergy.org. So on behalf of the Grand Haven Energy Organization, welcome. And for those of you following on YouTube, a hearty welcome as well. And for those of you who are new to the topic, or for those of you who missed the first forum, let me briefly provide some just kind of basic background information that may be useful to tonight's discussion. Board of Light and Power, BLP, is a municipal power company owned by the citizens of Grand Haven. In turn, we are represented by 5 citizens that we elect to the Board of Light and Power Board. The Board of Light and Power reports to the City of Grand Haven's City Council. Can't anymore because it's dark, but you may have noticed the smokestack is still standing. But the City Council officially closed Grand Haven's coal-fired Sims plant back in June of 2020. you were like me, you didn't notice. You got up in the morning, hit the switch, there was electricity, you never knew that one power source had been turned off and a new one turned on. The Board of Light and Power now buys all its power from the grid, where in fact the energy is much cheaper. In fact, so much so that they have recognized some significant savings. In fact, at this point, the savings are estimated to be around 29 million just since June. So that's pretty significant. Nevertheless, Board of Light and Power is pursuing a plan to spend about 17 million to install gas-fired generators on Harbor Island, or what's called the peaker plant. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The peaker plant would produce a small amount of power locally. Generators would only be used maybe 5 to 10% of the time to cover peak energy usage. Picture summer where it's blazing hot and all the industries are going full tilt and we need some more energy. The option is to buy it from the grid where it's expensive, or to have a peaker plant that can produce power locally. The board has made some efforts to communicate this plan with citizens, but I think they would admit, not overly successfully. And so a few weeks ago, on a split vote, they decided to spend $48,000 to hire a public relations firm to tell you and the rest of the citizens about their plan. That plan may lead to borrowing $46.6 million that would be paid off over 30 years. Some of that $46.6 million is unavoidable. It's the cost for site remediation and the like. But about 25 million of that would be for the optional installation of these gas-fired generators, the peaker plant, and from new construction of buildings out on Harbor Island. Because of savings resulting from not having to run the SIM plant anymore, and from purchasing all power at a much cheaper rate from the grid, the Board of Light and Power is convinced that they can pay for the bond without raising our rates. Here are the 4 issues that we think the Board of Light and Power ultimately needs to resolve in open discussion with its owners, who are the citizens of Grand Haven. First, snow melt. Bring myself talking to people like that. Snow melt. The old snow melt was produced when the Sims plant was running because it had excess heat, and generally that was the source of the heat, the water that's under the streets and sidewalks.
Sims plant shut down. What do? Board of Light and Power has addressed this by buying. Still hear me back there? Good. All right. By buying water heaters. Oh, okay, thank you. 11 minutes. Well, the note says correction. And Jerry, you could have told me this. It closed earlier, back in February. Is that right? Okay, yeah, confirmation. It wasn't June, it's February. Thank you. Anyway, Board of Light and Power has addressed this issue of snow melt by purchasing hot water heaters, big ones, and they are hoping to roll the cost of those into this 30-year bond if we ever get around to that. So that's one of the issues. Second issue, new buildings. The Board of Light and Power needs to demonstrate that they need to build new buildings, new offices, and an equipment storage garage in particular. If they can demonstrate that need, then second, they need to decide whether they use Harbor Island as the site for this new construction, or whether they reconfigure stuff at their Eaton Street property. But right now, there's a lot of stuff stored. That stuff could be stored on Harbor Island. They could do their construction on Eaton Street if they feel there's a need for that. Third thing, they need to talk about the environment and the impact that any construction will have on Harbor Island. That's the topic of the next forum, so I hope you turn up for that one as well. And the final thing that they need to deal with And that's part of tonight's discussion, is this peaker plan. We think the Board of Light and Power needs to explain why they should do something now and purchase and install 5 natural gas-fired generators to use as a peaker plant, or why they should delay that decision for a few years, continue to buy all the power from the grid, which has been working nicely, and see whether in that time renewable alternative energy sources, but especially solar with battery storage, becomes economically viable during that time. Fortunately, we have 4 panelists tonight with expertise and perspectives in different areas to discuss, and I want to underline that, not debate, this is a discussion. They'll discuss information about present and future energy sources. So it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. Patrick Bowland, I see in the center of my screen, I don't know exactly where he is back here. Is he up on one end or the other? Oh, he's not up there. No, he's up there. Okay, Patrick, you're on. Welcome to you. Patrick is the CEO and General Manager of Michigan Public Power Agency, MPPA. The MPPA is a municipal joint action agency that provides wholesale power supply and related services to publicly owned electric utilities of Michigan, such as the PLP. The MPPA was created in 1978 with a mission to provide competitive and reliable power supply to its public power utility members. MPPA has evolved and its core mission expanded to include sustainable power supply resources and services that leverage technological advances in renewable energy, distributed energy resources, and intelligent utilities. These members represent over 85% of the electric load and 90% of the electric generation of all public power in the state of Michigan. It's pretty impressive. Patrick, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it very well. Thanks, John.
Yeah, we still don't have that sound.
Okay, well, we still can't hear you, Patrick, but I'll relay it back to you. That's good enough.
Okay.
Okay. To my left is John Naser. John Naser is a resident of Grand Haven, a former Grand Haven City Council member. He is one of the 5 elected board members of the Board of Light and Power. And John has been an outspoken board member since 2009. He is here tonight to give his personal insights. His opinions are his own and do not necessarily represent the views of the Board of Light and Power. John, anything to add?
Thank you, John. Yes, I would like to emphasize that it's important that everybody out there understand that although I am an elected member of the BLP board, I do not speak for the board. Whatever I say tonight is an expression of my own personal opinions and not the opinion or position of the board itself.
Good, thank you. Rivet, we've talked about a little bit. Some people assume that supporters of clean energy are liberal tree huggers. Ed is a good example of one of many conservatives who know the field and are strong advocates for clean energy. For the energy geeks, maybe the teenager, I don't know, maybe one of you was an energy geek as well. Here's what I can tell you. Ed has built an 11.3 kilowatt fixed ground-mounted system at his own home, which includes a geothermal system, and he charges his Chevy Volt with his solar array. Former lobbyist, Ed is the executive director of the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum. Ed, I don't know if there's more that you would want to say. We can come back to you once you have a voice.
Jan, I think I can figure this out. Can you please tell the gentlemen that are on the Zoom meeting to check the chat and to call my phone?
Sure.
My number's in the chat. I think you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can hear
So
you.
for all the panelists that
Call
are
me.
on Zoom, Andrew would like you to check chat and then call her on her phone. And make it.
Okay, who do we got? All right, we're gonna try this. Hold on. This is working on the fly. All right, Ed, say something.
Am I here for real?
I don't know. Keep talking.
Well, I'm hearing my voice echoing back. Is it coming through the room now?
Getting better?
I don't know.
You guys can hear? Oh my goodness. Okay, this is so ragtag, but that's okay. All right, Ed, can you tell the group in the room a little bit about yourself?
Hang on, I can hear you now.
Right.
We can hear you.
Okay.
So
Be careful.
Oh, yes.
There is such a simple way to fix this.
Just fine, John, before.
Can you no longer hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, good, okay.
Who's next?
This is honestly so raggedy. Patrick, if you guys give me a call on the number in the chat, we'll all be able to hear you in the room. Just mute yourself on your Zoom and on your phone. I know this is raggedy, but I have a microphone hooked up to my phone so that you guys can hear me, and everybody on Zoom would be able to, everybody in the room would be able to hear you as well. John and Patrick, do you guys hear me right now? Can you shake your heads yes?
Yes.
Okay, call my phone. Yeah, okay. Thank you guys for tolerating our craziness. Okay.
All right. This is Pat.
Oh, great, Patrick.
Can you guys hear?
Yeah,
Okay.
loud and clear.
Okay, this is how we're gonna do it then. Sorry, go ahead, Jan. I'll stop
Want me
interrupting
to go
you.
ahead? Dr. John Kinch, the person you just heard speak, I think. Or John, have we heard from you? No, we've not heard from you yet.
Are you there?
John Kinch? John Kinch, can you hear us?
That actually looks like it might be more of a problem than just.
Somebody just walked in the room and it's completely silent. I wish you could see the expression on his face. What is going on?
We're gonna call everybody out there that's listening right now. If you are interested in helping us and you anything about computer audio and video, we're gonna join you to grow. We're gonna ask you to join our group immediately. I think we're good though. At least everybody online can see the presentation.
I think so. I think we have Patrick and Ed. We do not have John Kinch.
Oh, let's see. Hey.
Well, I wish we could blame us all on COVID, but you know, it's just a glitch.
So, John, can you hear me? This is John Kinch.
I think we could.
John, can you hear me, John Kinch?
Yeah, I can hear you. Let me call Andrea's phone from my landline, see if that works. Give me a second.
Looks like John is recording this. Anybody have a good joke we can share?
you hear me now?
I can. Can you guys hear him?
Say some more, John.
This is John Kinch with Michigan Energy Options.
Mute your computer.
I have to.
Okay. Okay, we can hear you.
So this is Dr. John Kinch, Executive Director of Michigan Energy Options. John directs the strategic and daily operations of Michigan Energy Options, which emphasizes innovative and collaborative projects between the public and private sectors. One example is the East Lansing Community Solar Park, built on a former capped landfill. Community solar allows customers to support clean renewable energy without having to install panels on their own roof while still receiving on-bill utility credits. John, anything more to add?
That sounded great, thank you.
Okay, great. So I think the timing is good. We had to sit through mine a little bit and apologize for that. I have a set of questions that I would ask each of the panelists, and the other panelists know that if there's an answer that's incomplete or something doesn't seem quite right, they're free to jump in afterwards and add whatever they want. However, this is not a debate, it's a discussion. So if any one of you thinks of a question, there are these little sheets of paper. Please write it down, and particularly after you've written your question, you kind of hold it up. Somebody will grab it from you, bring it over to Andrea, we'll sort through them all, and we'll get to those in the last segment of this discussion. Okay, the questions for our panelists. First one is for John Naser. And here's the background. Governor Whitmer has set a goal for Michigan being carbon neutral by 2050. Having closed its coal-fired plant, the BLP is now proposing using natural gas for a small peaker plant they hope to build on Harbor Island while still continuing to buy power from the grid. So let's start with peaker plants and natural gas. John, what is meant by a peaker plant and how would it be used in Grand Haven?
Thank you, John. I think you might have already answered this question in your introduction, but I'm gonna give it a shot anyway. And remember, I'm providing my own personal opinions, not the opinions of the board. First of all, what is meant by a peaker plant? A peaker plant is actually a supplemental power plant. It normally operates only when demand for power is high. It supplies power to make up needed power difference between the amount of power supplied by the base load generation and the additional power needed when power required exceeds the maximum base load power available. As an example, a base load generator can supply up to 36 megawatts, but on a warm summer afternoon with all the air conditioners on, the power needed by the system is peaking at 45 megawatts. So there's a difference of 9 megawatts. The peaker plant kicks in and supplies the additional 9 megawatts of power that's needed. Normally, a peaker plant can be turned on and off quickly. Peaker plants, due to their size, are normally less efficient than base load power plants. Grand Haven would use the proposed 5 natural gas peaker plants, a combined total of 12.5 megawatts, to help make up the difference when BLP customer power requirements exceed the amount of base load power available from the grid. The BLP would also use those 12.5 megawatts of capacity available from the peakers to offset the amount of capacity the BLP would be required to purchase from outside generation sources. So let's talk about the arguments for and against building a 12.5 megawatt peaker capacity on Harbor Island. The arguments for it would include, first of all, it provides a hedge against spikes in the electrical energy prices and future capacity purchases. Secondly, it makes available the 12.5 megawatts for local generation rather than purchase. It provides peak shaving, as I explained, if the market warrants it. It can be turned on and off quickly. And those small natural gas reciprocating engines are the most cost effective, appropriately sized, and suited technology to our particular needs and applications here in Grand Haven on this site. And that's what the reports that we've gotten have reported. Also, the 2.5 megawatt generators pair well with our snow melt system and will provide recovered heat for it. The 2.5 megawatt generators might provide a link to VLP power generation justification for the 5 heaters installed for snow melt this winter. Also, the peaker plant is compatible with the current size of the natural gas line for the Sims site, and the existing VLP staff are available to operate and maintain it. So those are the arguments for it. The arguments against building the peaker capacity on Harbor Island. Studies estimate that a plan to supply power using a combination of local generation with peaker units plus purchase power from the grid is more expensive for ratepayers than just purchasing power from the grid. So having the peakers and buying from the grid is more expensive than if you just buy from the grid. Natural gas peakers emit CO2, a greenhouse gas that would contribute to global warming. A substantial portion of our public favors clean, renewable energy generation, and told us so. Also, the proposed peaker plant does not meet the local generation requirements that have been stipulated by City Council in its resolution approved in 2018. Namely, that council agreeing to the closing and taking down the Sims 3 plant required the VLP to build a local generation facility capable of providing a majority of the power generation capacity needed for VLP customers. The proposed plant provides a maximum of 12.5 megawatts of local generation. The average usage of VLP customers is 35 megawatts with a peak load, depending on who you talk to, somewhere between 51 and 61 megawatts. So 12.5 megawatts is not a majority. Question of whether it's sufficient local generation. Another issue is that there's a risk that natural gas generation will be overtaken by clean renewable energy and become obsolete, a white elephant, if you would, while VLP customers are still paying off the 30-year bond. Does it make sense to spend $19 million on a generation facility that will run only an estimated 5 to 10% of the time? That's a question that's being asked by the community. There's also a concern in our community with building a peaker plant on Harbor Island. Aesthetic reasons, due to the uncertain and yet to be determined future 100 and 500 year floodplain levels, which may or may not change, and the plant's proximity to the newly planned Ottawa Sands project. Last of all, there's a concern that the plan does not include a provision for needed local backup generation if the grid should be incapacitated and down for a lengthy period of time. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Any of the panelists want to add anything before we move on? Okay. Patrick, question for you. Can a small peaker plant, like the one proposed for Grand Haven, be easily used to supply power for essential services if the grid ever goes down? And I should interject, the grid is, I've heard from Mr. Walters, 99.9% reliable. Anyway, if it were to go down, can a small peaker plant be used to supply power for essential services? There's some more questions related to that, Patrick. I'll just give them all to you. You have a statewide perspective. Are you aware of other communities who are considering peaker plants at this point? If you are aware, do you know where they are, what size they are? And in general, does PPA encourage their use? And why or why not?
Sure, thanks, John. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, everybody says yes.
Great. So a gas-fired electric generator, it is connected to the local distribution system, can provide essential services, can provide electricity during emergencies. Obviously, the size of the generator, the configuration of the electric distribution system, and the loads that are considered essential all have to be designed and calculated, but absolutely local generation is a local reliability source and provides power through the utilities distribution system. As far as other utilities having local gas-fired or local peaking generation, largely all utilities have some form of local generation on their system, even the very smallest of electric utilities, and they do that for the reasons we just discussed. They may use a local electric generation for other reasons, and you see that in a community down the street with Holland. So the type of resource, the community itself, fuel supply, community objectives, customer types dictate the type of local electric generation that a utility may have. But almost all of them have some form of local power supply for emergencies or black start service. Are other utilities pursuing gas peaking facilities? At this time, there are no other members, but other public power utilities have in the more recent past pursued gas-fired generation, and they did it for different reasons. Most of our members have facilities that were put in 20, 30 years ago. So as those facilities reach their natural end of life, they'll have to make decisions about local electric supply. As far as MPPA encouraging our communities to pursue local electric supply, Michigan Public Power Agency provides complementary services. The primary benefits the agency provides our members are diversification, so our members can pursue and participate in large-scale projects, but they can participate in those projects in very small quantities, so they can build a portfolio of resources that they otherwise would not be able to do locally on their own because their system is just not big enough. They also can achieve economies of scale. The economies of scale more recently has been in renewable resources, where we've done large-scale wind projects and large-scale solar projects. So those resources are 30, 40, 50, 60% less expensive than a small local distribution facility. So those primary economic reasons, along with the resource management that the agency provides, and of course the expertise in wholesale markets, are the things that our members rely on NPPA for. However, all of them have local community objectives, and we obviously encourage our communities to make decisions about what is right for them. We will advise, educate, and engage with the community, but ultimately it's their decision.
Great, thank you for that. Anybody want to follow up?
I would like to, John. And I'm not going to argue with you, Patrick, but I've done some research, and the fact is that if the grid goes down for any length of time, because the peaker plant would be fired with gas, according to the 3 congressional commissions that have studied this, gas would not be available. It might be available in short term. I guess what I want to say is these commissions that were previously formed to assess the threat to the United States from electromagnetic pulse attack, if we had an EMP attack on our grid and it went down, in all likelihood, the grid would be disabled for months, according to these commissions. Cutting off power needed to pump natural gas and control the natural gas grid. Grand Haven's only source of power from outside would be cut off because we'd be requiring power from the grid. The grid wouldn't be working, and we wouldn't be able to generate power because after a short period of time, there would not be gas available. The current plan provides no backup if the grid should go down for a lengthy period of time. The experts estimate that if the grid were disabled for 3 months by a nuclear electromagnetic pulse attack from one of our country's enemies, such as North Korea, as an example, the effects of no electricity would result in a 90% die-off rate of the population. Speaking as one member of the BLP board, and just one member, it's my opinion that as elected officials, the BLP board and the city council have a responsibility to do everything in our power to keep our citizens safe. That's part of our charter. A plan for the future must include a provision for generating enough power locally to power our most important functions. Not 36 megawatts, but enough power to power our most important functions to keep our citizens alive in the event that the grid goes down for a substantial length of time. Thank you.
Just when you thought you didn't have enough to worry about.
And I know I sound like I'm crazy probably, but go on the internet and read those reports. You'll know what I'm talking about.
So just real quickly to the panelists, taking into account, I guess, things like EMP, what is your own sense? Is the energy supply for the electric grid sufficient for the next 5 to 10 years? That'd be a yes, no if you want. Yes, yes. Patrick?
Sure, I'll take that. The local electric supply has sufficient deliverability to provide power from all sorts of resources within the state. In fact, there were significant upgrades to that system a few years ago in anticipation of closing the Sims power plant. In fact, Grand Haven has multiple feeds from 2 different transmission providers. You don't design electric systems for Six Sigma events, and even if you have local power supply, you still have to have fuel. It's just not economically practical to design an electric system that way. And so, we design for expected outcomes, and we have one expectation. And that's a balance between cost and reliability that the electric system has chosen. Anything greater than that obviously is going to cost significantly more money for local customers.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. We're, for the next 5 to 10 years, electric grid probably okay. And then Patrick is saying, it's impossible in some ways to plan for all the large scale events that might happen. So I'm going to move on because I'm mindful of time and we took a lot of it just getting everything set up. So John Kinch, we know that burning coal produced unhealthy smoke, which helped bring about a change in our climate. So now the term natural and natural gas implies certain things about it. Is natural gas considered to be a clean source in its emission and extraction process? Is it considered a renewable source?
So first, can you hear me okay? Now your heads. Great. So thanks for having me, by the way. Well, yeah, natural gas remains a fossil fuel and is compared against coal, which, of course, has been the backbone for our energy system for 100 years. Coal is especially, as we've learned with time, polluting when you burn it. So it creates lots of CO2, as we know, and other kinds of greenhouse gases. So if you compare natural gas to coal, it does pretty well. It's probably got 50% fewer emissions than coal does. It doesn't mean that it's emission free. It does create pollution. It does create greenhouse gases such as nitrous oxide. It also has issues with how it is, of course, extracted from the earth. We're all aware of fracking and some of the concerns people have around the country with water supplies being polluted and things along those lines. And also, because it's methane, there's lots of leakages, both in the harvesting of natural gas and the transportation of natural gas. So it is not without its issues around the environment. And also important, I think, to make this case, and we've been kind of making it already, but if you invest in a natural gas combined cycle plant or a rice generator plant, you're making a 30-year investment. And what that does then is it takes other choices and options off the table. So if you've invested that kind of money, today you may not be able to afford to go in renewables in a few years from now because that money isn't going to be there. So I think that's probably the thing that's most on my mind these days, especially because the industry, renewable energy with storage, is changing so rapidly that what was true in 2018 isn't true in 2020, and what's true in 2020 won't be true in 2022.
That's actually a good segue to the question for Ed. Natural gas has been described by some as a bridging technology. And so the question is, what is it a bridge to? What do they, when people say that, what do they mean by it?
Well, certainly it is a bridging technology from, as John pointed out, a much more polluting intensive kind of fuel like coal to, preferably emission-free, renewable energy sources. We're not at a place where we can walk away from these more traditional generation, mechanisms right now, but we can move toward it. And there's even a prospect that we could burn natural gas with fewer or, much lower emissions with some improvements in carbon capture technology during, the firing process. So there are possibilities. But certainly, we're not going to be at a place with renewable energies like wind or solar combined with battery to replace all of our demand for quite some time into the future. So, unless we all want to sit in the cold and the dark, we're going to need to continue to utilize the existing, generation sources that we have. But it certainly can be a bridge. And again, to the extent that we could be more careful with the way we extract natural gas, and the way that it's used, the way that it's burned, if we could reduce some of that impact, that would help reduce its impact further until we get to that place. But I do want to reiterate that, or start to bring into the conversation where the price of renewables are. Wind and solar have evolved so dramatically in the last decade in terms of their efficiency and cost that we really can bring them on more cheaply than any other source. And what's important to think about over 5 to 10 years is that once you install wind or solar, there are no additional fuel costs, right? The wind and the sun are not prices that you have to worry about 3, 5, and 10 years down the road. What the price of natural gas will be, what the price of these sources will be, because there is no fuel cost. So that's a really important thing to consider in comparing these systems, and also to realize that solar will generate value in electricity all year long, where my understanding of this rice plant design is that it's not going to be used all the time as a base load. It'll be turned on and off at different times for certain purposes, and so it will take longer to get a return on investment with that than you would a solar system that once it's in place, and given there'll be days it's not sunny, there'll be more productive days in the spring and summer and so forth with solar, but it'll be a year-long production process as opposed to the more periodic or episodic use of a rice. So those are just different factors that have to be considered.
Good, thank you for that. Panelists are going to notice I'm going to jump around a little bit with the questions, and that has nothing to do with your ability to answer them. It's just a function of looking at the time and making sure we save time for audience questions. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions. For communities wishing to produce and store renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind, batteries seem like the best option. There are continuing efforts to improve battery capacity. For example, in California, there's a joint venture of Pacific Gas and Electric with Tesla. It was announced a few months ago, 750 megawatt project with solar systems coupled with Tesla batteries. Well, the question is, what is your own sense? Each of you brings a unique perspective. What is your own sense of the progress that's being made on storage batteries? And do you see a time where you think that storage systems will be economically competitive with energy produced by natural gas? And why don't we start, well, I don't know, Patrick, you want to take that? And then John and Ed, and then John and Naser.
Sure. I'm going to do the proverbial. Can you hear me?
Yeah, speak loudly, but we can hear you, right?
Great. Okay. So as far as batteries, batteries are consumers of electricity and producers of electricity. So the real value of using batteries is going to come from more renewables, particularly if the strategy is to decarbonize the electric system. And in Michigan right now, we're just probably hovering above 15%. And so really the two go together hand in hand. And there's a lot of discussion about, how effective and how large batteries can penetrate the electric system. But I'm very bullish on batteries. Just what we've seen, we have the transportation industry and the electric industry in parallel pursuing this technology, and they've already made significant improvements in the last 5 years, and I expect that to continue every year here forward. The Michigan Public Power Agency has been talking to our members about doing an experimental project, and I fully expect sometime over the next 5 years or so that we will be putting battery projects in. The RTOs, the wholesale grid operators, have passed tariff rules under an order from FERC called 841. And right now, the most important or most valuable thing in the state of Michigan is capacity. And there's a 4-hour rule. And for batteries complying with resource adequacy requirements in the wholesale markets. And right now, that the economics of that type of a battery is multiples of expense compared to a gas peaker. And the prices are coming down, and I expect they will continue to do so. But they're not ready for prime time yet. And when they are, and probably before they are, you'll see a lot of utilities and organizations like ourselves doing smaller projects to learn about the technology and to slowly integrate it into our portfolio of power supplies. So I'm very optimistic about the future of batteries, and intentionally, quite frankly, leaving our portfolio open in those later years to participate in the exciting technology as it comes into a commercial application opportunity.
Great. It seems like a good, far-reaching, far-thinking policy about them. John Kay, John Kinch.
Yeah, I think most of us looking at the clean energy sector couldn't imagine a technology taking hold and going as fast as solar has in the last few years. Except we're seeing that exact same thing happen in batteries now. And batteries really is that kind of missing link to take a resource like solar that's intermittent and make it something which is much more dispatchable and much more accessible 24/7. I've read some statistics that you're looking at deployment of batteries going from sometime in 2018 to 2022 to be something like 900% more batteries coming onto the market. And there's a reason for this. And part of the reasons is our transportation sector. The technology that goes into lithium-ion batteries that power your Tesla or your Ford Bolt or Volt is very similar to what we're going to be using in our utility sector. So that technology breakthrough is coming on strong because our auto companies are switching over to EVs. And so there's a lot of synergy there between those two technologies. So I think we're just going to see more of batteries both behind the meter and in front of the meter as a way both to shave load, which I think is kind of the idea of the peaker plant in our discussion tonight, not so much as backup. It's shaving load and also sort of shaving costs. You can move things around using a battery. So when energy is cheaper at a certain time, you could even charge that battery up from the grid if you want, or you can marry it to a solar resource. And then it's a real clean solution to having moments in time in which you have issues around peak. And I guess I just want to ask one question to the room, perhaps, is that looking at the load profile for Grand Haven, the difference between the average load and the peak load is about twice. I'm going to guess this, having spent lots of nice time in Grand Haven, it's because in the summer, you get tens of thousands of people that come in there and are staying in the condos and the hotels and the Airbnbs and their summer homes, and they're turning on air conditioning and appliances and all the rest. And it happens also to be the time when solar does its best work.
Yeah, if I can, John, I'll jump in as well, or Young and John. And I'll echo First Patrick's comment that I'm very bullish on batteries too. I just want to have the audience think about the first plasma TV that came out, and it was huge. It was not huge. It was heavy, and it cost $3,000. And we looked at that going, well, I don't know where that's going, right? And now we have these enormous LED screen TVs that are 10 times lighter and so much more clear. Their picture's amazing, and they're 90 inches across, and they cost $700, right? And that's true of our cell phones. We think about your first cell phone. It had a battery, like that was 2 pounds, and now your cell phone weighs a few ounces. This is what is going to happen with battery technology, both for our vehicles and for the ability to use it as a storage device for the grid. And as John just mentioned, it's a dispatchable resource then. You can bring it on and use it when it makes the most sense. You can then fill it up and fill it with electricity and energy at a time when it makes the most sense, or during the night when the wind's still blowing and we don't need a lot of lights and power on. We can take that energy and put it into batteries and then utilize it during the day or other times. It becomes a very valuable resource when it's dispatchable. So I agree with both John and Patrick that we're going to see incredible breakthroughs in technology, and battery is going to be something that we don't even necessarily think only is tied to renewables, but just as a resource where we put that load in storage in a dispatchable place, and we use it when it makes the most sense, when it makes our energy most affordable. So it's going to be a tool.
John? I'm in agreement with what's been said. I'm excited about the future for batteries. I think that there will be a lot of improvements in the near future. I would note that the plan that's currently on the table does allow space out on the site for storage development. A significant amount of space out there.
That site, you mean Harbor Island?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm gonna, again, mindful of time and that we will circle back to these questions if the audience runs out of questions, but I wanted to save about a half hour for them to pose their questions to you. But before we get there, the one final question for each of you, and I'll start with Ed, and then we'll go to John Naser, and then Patrick, and then John Kinch will have the final word. What do you see as the pros and cons, or the risks and rewards, if you prefer, of either A, continuing to buy off the electrical grid, but also using a 30-year bond commitment to construct the 12.5 megawatt gas-fired peaker plant now, which Board of Light and Power estimates might only be used 5 to 10% amount of the time, but which also meets state required reserve capacity amount, option A, or B, continuing to buy 100% off the grid, including reserve capacity purchases, and waiting 5 years to see what changes take place in renewable energy production and the developing energy storage technologies.
Well, you know, there's an awful lot of factors that would come into play in how you make that decision. And, you know, I have a master's degree in policy analysis, and you have to take every factor into consideration before you make a decision when you're a policy analyst. So I wouldn't say that I'm qualified, you know, to maybe say I've looked at all those and advise on those kind of two options. What I can say is I think, you know, more consideration needs to be made for the potential for a renewable like solar, simply because the proposal for the 12 megawatts is more periodic. If it were more of a base load plan, I wouldn't be as hesitant to defer and say investing in a gas peaker or a gas plant would make some sense. But because it's proposed to be used so much more sporadically or episodically, I'm hesitant to think that it's as good of an investment as maybe, you know, continuing to utilize grid power that's as cheap as it is today. And it could become more expensive. We don't know how natural gas prices will be affected by exporting natural gas and so forth. And so, you know, there are some variables that make it difficult to decide. What I do think is that solar is a good investment because it could be a year-round production thing, and its prices continue to come down. It is cheaper to bring online. So I'm not as hesitant to say that would be a good resource for the community, as at least something that should be studied very carefully side by side with that, with the idea of a peaker plant. I'm just reluctant to bring on a source that's not being utilized very, very consistently for at least that much investment and that long-term of a payoff. So that would be my initial concern about the peaker kind of idea.
Okay, thank you.
I also want to, let me throw one more thing in there. I don't think that the gas peaker or these RICE units serve any benefit to if the grid goes down, right? You don't have a microgrid system. You know, when the whole grid goes down, you can't just all of a sudden throw 12 megawatts on from one source and have it go exactly where you want it to go. You can't just send it to a hospital facility or some other critical facility unless you have your distribution set up and system set up in a way that I'm sure it's not set up. You can't create a microgrid if you have a larger grid system failure where that 12 megawatts can then just be sent to critical facilities. I don't see that as within the capacity of the distribution system right now, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah. Thank you. John?
I'm not in favor of waiting 5 years to do anything. There are a number of things that, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, not the board's, a number of things that need to be determined before we can actually get into the weeds on what the specific answer is. These things require educating us, the public, about the advantages and disadvantages. First one is, does our public want to buy power or do they want to generate it locally? I'm getting mixed messages from the public on that. And the city council's on record as saying they want a majority of the capacity available locally, but that was back in 2018. So one question is, where is the public on this? Do they want to buy power, which is cheapest way to go? Or do they want to generate it? Or do they want a combination of those? And what kind of split? Number two, the suitability of the island. You go out to the island, several of the roads are underwater out there. In fact, the parking lot where the boat launch is, this summer was totally underwater. And so the question is, do we really want to build a building even though it may be on a knoll on the island. Do we really want to build a building on the island without knowing more about what the future holds for the island? We need experts that study this stuff to tell us what they think about this, and I haven't seen that. Third question, is backup needed? We've already addressed that. The question of whether or not, if the grid goes down for a length of time, we're without power right now, we're out of luck. If it goes down now, in fact, where I live, it went down a couple hours the other day. You'd be surprised. I think you know how much you need power, but you don't really know until you lose it. And so the question is, do we need backup? And number 4, if the public has to buy into this plan, whatever it is, in my opinion. And if the majority of the community thinks that we should have local generation, then we need to discuss the pros and cons of the various types of generation. First of all, the question, clean or carbon free, which is it? Does the public, are they okay with carbon like gas? Or are they wanting clean renewable energy? And then the comparison of the various types, gas, solar with batteries, wind with batteries, geothermal, nuclear. We need to understand the pros and cons, not just of the cost, not just of what it's going to cost the ratepayer, but these other things. How reliable would the source be if we were to use it? And what does it do to the environment if we use it? There are other questions too that go with it. So I'm not in favor of waiting for 5 years, but I am in favor of trying to get a good sense of where the community is on these questions. And it begins with trying to educate the community as to the advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons, and then maybe we have a survey. We've had surveys, but maybe it involves a better survey of the whole community somehow, and maybe it involves a vote. I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Just to clarify a little, John, the question was posed waiting 5 years. You're saying you would not want to wait 5 years. You'd want to do some other things, education.
We can chew gum and ride the bike at the same time.
Well, how much, it seems to some of us that the Board of Light and Power is moving ahead with a plan. So there's not a whole lot of time, given their timetable, to educate the public, as you call it. So do you see some delay in there?
Yeah, I think we should put it on pause.
Okay, all right. Patrick?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I think Grand Haven should be commended. They shut down a large plant that produced energy largely around the clock. And so the whole reason all of us are here today is because there's a wonderful opportunity to build a diversified portfolio of power supply resources that will significantly decarbonize their supply base and will continue to do so here as we march forward. Grand Haven has already participated, just for audience knowledge, they've already participated in a very large wind project in Michigan. Probably the last one is going to get built here for a number of years because of some challenges with ordinances in the state of Michigan. They've also participated in the largest solar project built in the state of Michigan, almost 150 megawatts in Shiawassee County. And they are looking to participate in another solar project that the agency is pursuing here probably in early 2021. So their portfolio is the diversity and the amount of renewable resources that are coming into their portfolio is pretty significant. It's also helpful to understand that Grand Haven, like all load-serving entities in the state, have an obligation to demonstrate to the state of Michigan through the MPSC, through Public Act 341 that was passed in December of 2016, that they have enough resources to meet their peak load plus reserves. And they have to file that 4 years in advance. Actually, it's about 4.5 years when you count from the filing date. So MPPA can't sit still. We can't wait 5 years. We have to make decisions now for 4.5 years from now to ensure that we comply with the law. So one thing I would encourage all of you to do is make sure you try to bring a decision forward here, because the more uncertainty that exists over doing a local resource or a grid resource delays Grand Haven's ability to make those decisions, and it makes it more difficult for MPPA to help them manage their power supply. You know, there's a lot of different choices you could make here. This is really a capacity resource, and it represents just under 15% of their peak load and less than 5% of their energy. It absolutely fits in a diversified portfolio. You could debate about the size of it. You could also debate about the term that it's being financed for. But I think they should be commended for what they have already done. And they have plenty of room in their portfolio to entertain battery technology as it comes due too. So I think it's an exciting time for Grand Haven. I guess the last thing I would say is, you know, it's a community decision, and I'm glad you guys are having this discussion today. It's for the people that live and work in that city to decide. That's what public power is all about. It's about community-made decisions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. We couldn't agree more. John Kinch.
Well, we're called Michigan Energy Options for a reason, because I believe in options. And so my thinking about Grand Haven or any of the utilities in our state, we have 65 utilities, by the way, so there's a lot of decision makers out there around local energy, if you will, is that given that many utilities around the country are adopting some kind of a peaker plant that is a combination of storage and renewables, and the fact this phenomenon is happening so quickly, that taking a look at that seriously may be in the best interest. Now, states like Hawaii, California, Massachusetts are doing this, the usual suspects, New York State to some extent, but also Minnesota. Minnesota has a legislative statute now that requires its utility to provide a certain amount of energy storage in its mix as part of its energy solution. And I'll even point somewhere closer to home. I live in Grand Rapids, and over here there's something called Circuits West, which is a pilot project by Consumers Energy, in which they have put a lot of solar on the roofs of these downtown buildings, including some new construction. They've also put a large battery bank in play there as well, and they're experimenting. They're moving load around. They're trying to understand this technology. They're trying to see how it works in their best interest. So I think it's always probably good not to go first when it comes to really being innovative. But I think, you know, not being too late is also good. And I think there's some lessons that can be learned from some of these other utilities around the country and in our own backyard about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I would just suggest that in the next year or two to look at that and give that some consideration.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the audience questions, and I think I need Andrea's help with this.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to say, if your writing is illegible, we're going to put you on the spot. It seems like these three are related to location and type of electricity in the city.
Okay. So the first question is one that is directed to John Naser. The rest of you are free to join in. The question is, even if the Board of Light and Power elects to go solar, where are there locations in your service area large enough for such installations?
You're playing right into my hands. I'm not an expert, but I will throw out a couple of ideas, actually 3 ideas. First one is the airport. The airport is 155 acres, 100 acres of it is mowable. They mow it. From what I've read, solar can require anywhere from 4 to 7 acres per megawatt. Let's just pick 5. It'd be possible to put between 15 and 20 megawatts on the airport. And I'm saying, just in terms of the number, I have no idea whether or not, you know, there are other things that would have, I'm sure there are other things that would have to be considered. But that would be one place to look. Second possibility, rooftop, I just mentioned, rooftop solar. It requires a lot of work in terms of our distribution system, because if you have all of these entities turning power on and off, it's sort of like, it's similar to what we've been doing in the past, not only a much more difficult problem, but it can be done, in my opinion. And so rooftop is a possibility as this, as a way to keep the community alive if the grid were to go down for 3 months. If there is enough rooftop to sustain life. And that is, my question is can we look into various types of programs where we could encourage the businesses in the community, the schools, the governmental end of it, and the residents, find some way to make it attractive for them to want to install solar. Think of it. Think if we had, let's even a third of our community rooftops on solar, what that would mean. That's the second possibility. Third possibility is to find an entrepreneur who wants to build a solar farm next to Grand Haven, probably out in the township, and to partner with them. So those are 3 possibilities in my mind that really need to be explored.
John is a prescient panelist because there are more questions here dealing with rooftop solar, and I think you pretty well covered them. One was a warning from a person probably my age who says, talking about Harbor Island and can solar be built there, maybe put it on risers or something, and it concludes, the water will rise again. So you've been warned. If for some reason we haven't completely covered.
But John, one question, one thing. In terms of the island, the current plan has a place for a small community solar farm.
Garden.
It's a garden, yeah, I'm sorry, garden is right there. But it's only, at max, it's only about 1/4 of a megawatt. It's not very big.
Can the panelists discuss the costs for capacity versus electricity under the 2 scenarios? I imagine what the person is getting at, because we've been throwing around the idea that if we buy power from the grid, that there are these state requirements, and I think they're wondering, so you buy from the grid, it's been described as inexpensive, but if you have to buy capacity from the grid, that is expensive. How do those 2 different costs relate if you have your own peaker plant and you've invested $17 million to build it? So then you're providing this capacity.
That's one of the justifications for the, and gentlemen chime in here. It's one of the justifications for building the peaker plant is that 12.5 megawatts of capacity, then you would not have to lock up 12.5 megawatts of capacity. That would take the place of what you would have to purchase out in the free market. My understanding is.
Any idea how the costs would relate? I mean, it's difficult because one is 17 million over 30 years, but.
Our staff has suggested, has told us that the cost for the bonding for it would actually be cheaper than buying the capacity. Now, I don't know what assumptions are made in terms of what will change, if anything, in terms of the cost of a megawatt of capacity out into the future. But at least that's been put forth as an idea.
John, Kinch, do you thought about that, or Patrick, Ed?
I'm going to defer Patrick on this one as he's got some ideas about it.
All right.
It has anything to do with how the EPA is working in the wholesale market, how you're spot purchasing power, all those kinds of considerations. That's really more in his ken than mine.
Sure, I'll tackle that. I mean, the buy versus build question is a dynamic one. It constantly changes. Michigan, as probably all of you know, is in a reserve margin deficit last year, and the expectation is that we are going to be in a challenging and declining reserve margin situation here for the next few years, and that's largely because of the closure of a lot of the baseload coal plants, and we haven't kept up with those requirements. There's a lot of work going on among the utilities to manage that. Load management, demand response, we haven't talked about that today, but it's another component. Energy efficiency is a component. Enhancing the transmission system so we get more power delivered from outside of the state is a component. And of course, building more power plants is a component. And solar, right now, we get about 50% of the nameplate or installed capacity is capacity credit. So that is, so if you build, say, a 50 megawatt solar facility, you get 25 megawatts of that is counted as accredited capacity. There's some concern inside of the wholesale regional operator that they want to change the rules and change the calculation method, which would lower the capacity credit for solar, maybe down to 30% versus 50%. Today, wind gets only 15%, and so that's the challenges with the renewable resources. That's why batteries are really so important. So the cost to buy capacity has historically been significantly less expensive than building. And then last year, for the first time in a really long time, the cost to buy for a short period of time went higher than cost to build. So we believe in a balanced portfolio, and you're always going to be in a dynamic environment where supply and demand are going to change, technology is going to change. But the one thing about the power industry now that's different than in the past, I mean, utilities like Grand Haven used to build power plants to serve their entire load. I mean, that was a 25, 30-year decision. Most utilities do not do that anymore. And with the pace of change, not just the change itself, but the pace of change really requires a more nimble utility going forward. And I think Grand Haven is trying to do that here. We can debate again on the size of the peaker or the location of it or the finance period and all that, but I think they are trying to be a nimble, diversified utility going forward. And so anyway, the long and short of it is that the cost to purchase, it's not just the cost, also there's also an availability issue. And right now, like I said, because of the declining reserve margin, it could become a point where there's nothing to buy.
Okay. Thanks. So in other words, when the power plants close, the coal-fired power plants that are being taken offline used to have excess capacity that could be bought fairly cheaply. But now that there's fewer and fewer of those, the cost of buying that capacity is going up. Do I understand you?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks. Good. Do you have any idea what the idea that there may be a future carbon tax will have on rates and ratepayers?
Well, yeah, I'll jump in there as the conservative in the group, as the Conservative Energy Forum. We're not big fans of the carbon tax. While I support in concept the economic reality that pollution is an externality, and if you're not paying that price, you're kind of getting away with something, right? If I can produce electricity with a fossil fuel and I don't pay that negative externality cost that I'm polluting other people's air and I'm, degrading the environment. And from an economic perspective, and even the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative kind of think tank, recognizes that reality. But at the same time, a policy, and again, here's my policy analyst background,
when you implement a policy, there are also kind of those unintended negative consequences. And I think that a carbon tax now in the discussion would potentially have negative consequences, whereas, just going full bore, let's just drive technology as fast and as far as we can. Let's get those batteries as efficient as we can. Let's bring them on. I think that there's an innovation incentive approach, and then there's kind of like the let's tax what we want less of and subsidize more of what we want kind of. That's other approach. And we come from the conservative energy farm perspective, we'd rather just put our foot on the accelerator. I won't say the gas pedal, because you won't have a car with gas in it, in another 10 years. You won't buy a car that's gas powered. So we just believe that innovation and technology is going to rocket us forward as fast as we hope to. And I'm not sure that a debate over carbon tax is going to be as helpful as focusing on solutions. And we did only touch on energy efficiency. That's a huge thing. If all of us use the most efficient means of heating and cooling our homes and making them more efficient, everything, we could save 20, 30, 40% of our energy costs right out the gate. And that not only would reduce environmental impact, it would also keep a lot more money in our pockets as homeowners and business owners. So we really need to look at that energy efficiency thing, and that's John Kinch's specialty.
I'm glad you mentioned it. The panel discussion that occurred previously, that was the conclusion that the economists came to. The first thing you need to do before anything else is take time as a community, maybe take several years, and have an organization like the Board of Light and Power promote energy efficiency in the homes and businesses, and thereby recognize the savings you're talking about. I'm going to give, let's see, Ed has spoken, Patrick, John, anything to add to what's been said?
I'm good.
All right.
I might say one thing, John. In terms of drivers of all of this, we've been kind of alluding to this. You mentioned the climate goals now that are for the state of Michigan. The city of Lansing just came forward with a climate action plan. Same with East Lansing. A lot of cities have renewable energy goals of 100%. And you have companies in Michigan that are turning to their utility providers saying, we want a greener source of energy. If you can't provide it for us, we'll go out onto the market and get it ourselves. So I think that's something to think about as well, given the commercial industrial activity in Grand Haven's footprint, that there may be a time where the business community or the manufacturing community or others through city council may say, we want to have a resource that's cleaner. And that might not happen tomorrow. It might not happen next year. But if it were to happen in several years from now and you've got a natural gas rice generator there, that may be a challenge to meet those requirements at that point.
Okay. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Patrick Bowland, Rivet, John Kinch, John Naser. Apologize to all of you for the glitches you've lived through. You've been a good audience, very quiet when you needed to be. Appreciate that. And on behalf of the Grand Haven Energy Organization, thank you for being here. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your expertise and perspectives. I, for one, have enjoyed the discussion. I wish that it could go on longer. One of my jobs as moderator is to say it's 8:30 and time to stop. I could go on for another hour, and if we could get to some of the, there's a couple of questions we didn't get to that I wish we had. At any rate, thank you. The next community discussion on environmental concerns about Harbor Island, which some of you will know is formerly a dump and has some interesting things under it, will be held here on November 10th. Same time, this time moderated by former Mayor Roger Bergman. And beyond that, the Energy Organization is considering a fourth forum discussing the impact of the BLP decisions on local industry. So we hope you will attend. Thank you and good night.